Looks like we're about 121 folks joining us tonight. Looks like we're 5 minutes after 6 o'clock, so I think we should get started. Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Carmen Martinez with the City of Chicago Department of Planning and Development. Today, we are all very excited to talk about this project, Milwaukee Avenue Urban Identity. Tonight's agenda listed before you. We're going to do some introductions of a team, give you a little bit of a project overview, just to give you an idea of what this is all about. We'll present the findings and feedback that we've received so far. We'll talk about community engagement, the next steps, and also allow for questions and answers. Next slide. And today. So today you're joining us in the first quarter of this study. Each touch point, we're going to pretty much address 4 topics. The first quarter, where we are today, just some awareness about the projects. We're here to listen. We're also here to give you some information about the planning process, talk about what we've been working on, talk about the study area, some key definitions, and also allow for some input. The next 3 touch points, as you see, between quarter 2, 3, and 4, these other community meetings, which you'll all be invited to, we'll have the opportunity to share more of our existing conditions for us to be able to discuss the project, talk about, just ongoing key focus areas, talk about just where we are with the project. Also sharing with you buildings that we've identified as character buildings, allow for continuing collaboration, allowing for the community and our working groups to help shape the project. We'll talk about design principles and how we're going to integrate design guidelines for this project, which will help us with rehabilitating, reusing buildings and providing strategy tools for future development. And in quarter 4, this is where we're going to give everyone the opportunity for us to review, provide response time. We'll provide draft guidelines for our working group as well as the public. And we'll talk about the focus areas with the recommendations for a future overlay district. Next slide. So all our engagement efforts, we're trying to address our key principles for all of us to just have as goals for all our meetings moving forward. So the next 2 slides, our key principles will be, we're going to approach this process in good faith, with good spirits, try to have collective learning, trying to seek understanding from others, have motivation and aspiration. We value everyone's voices, so we want to make sure that we listen and have an open mind for all participants, their unique ideas and perspectives. We'll engage and embrace a creative tension, understanding, so that we can make sure we may not always agree with each other, but when conflict arises or disagreements arise, we're gonna seek a place of convergence, collaboration, and productivity. Next slide. Well, we also, we're gonna be respectful of all participants and organizers, just being mindful of everyone's speaking time, responding to everyone's thoughts and ideas and perspectives. We will be clear and explicit about our intentions and expectations and aim for transparency, inclusivity, and action-oriented processes. We'll continue to evaluate who's missing from the conversation. Later in the presentation, we'll talk about some of the organizations that we're working with, as well as other opportunities for engagement. Next slide. Okay, so some Zoom logistics for those that are used to Zoom meetings. Some of this might be repetitive, but just for today's purposes, please make sure that your name is shown correctly. We want to make sure that we know who's here, who's participating. If you're representing an organization, please make sure you add the name after your first and last name, just so that we can make sure that we're gauging all the comments and making sure we're responding to the correct folks joining us. To submit questions, you can enter your questions in the Zoom Q&A window. That's going to be monitored throughout the meeting. There will be time to answer questions like we mentioned. Just in the event that we can't get to everything or we need to do a follow-up, having the chat just works best for us, just to make sure that we get to everyone and try to respond to things that we couldn't get to tonight. So some of the panelists might be able to answer the questions verbally At the end of the meeting, we may have unanswered questions. Like I said, we will be posting those on our FAQ tab on our project website. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm gonna turn this over to site design so we can talk about some live polling questions we're gonna do.
Thanks, Carmen. This is Sarah here with Site Design Group. We're also going to be doing some live polling throughout the meeting. So we're going to be using Slido as a form of polling. So our first question is coming up here right after this slide. So if you could either take out your smartphone and scan the QR code here on the screen, or open up a new browser and type in www.slido.com. And then it'll give you a prompt to add in a code, and you'll add in this code 1092245. That's shown up on the screen. We'll also pop this in the chat so you guys have it handy for you. But we're going to be asking 2 questions during this meeting tonight. Again, using Slido. So if you could pull out your phone and scan the QR code on the left, or open up a new browser, go to slido.com and type in the code there. I will pull up the next question here and give you all a chance to answer it. So the first question that we want to hear from you about is, how did you learn about today's event? There are a couple different options that you can put your answer in. Oh, I see already a couple of people are already answering, getting the hang of it. But the answers that you can choose from are aldermen, social media, community organizations, neighbor/word of mouth, other DPD project website or newsletter, or flyer. So again, we see some votes coming in, but you can also scan the QR code at the top left here if you missed it on the last slide, or again, join at slido.com with the code there. Okay, looks like we're getting some good responses here from the aldermen and community organizations, which is great to hear. We've been working with them throughout the process, and we'll obviously be continuing to work with them. So that's great to see. And if you, throughout the project, think of other ways that we can reach out to the community, feel free to reach out to DPD and let them know some other opportunities that we can reach out to the public. Great. Looks like we're getting some good responses here. Let this go for a couple more seconds. If you haven't been able to put your answer in yet, go ahead and scan the QR or open up a new browser, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, looks like it's slowing down. So community organizations and aldermen, that's great to see so many responses. How you all learned about the event today. So again, we'll be continuing to work with them throughout the project, and then be posting to social media, our project website, and flyers as well. Carmen, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So we want to also introduce you guys to who you'll be working with for the next couple of months. From the city side, with the Department of Planning and Development, our Northwest side is represented by Cindy Rubik, Deputy Commissioner, myself, again, Carmen Martinez, the Supervising Planner for the Northwest region. We also have Lewis Clayton, who's a City Planner. Next slide. From our aldermanic offices, again, this is a group effort, and we'll have an opportunity to have some of the aldermen speak and give you a little bit of more context, but we are working with 3 wards. The first ward represented by Alderman Daniel Espada, Alderman Scott Wagasbat, Ward 32, and Alderman Carlos Rosa, who's representing the 35th Ward. Next slide. Our consultant team. We couldn't be doing any of this without our consultants. They've been great to work with. So we will have an opportunity to engage with them further. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction of our groups that we're working with. So representing Site Design Group, we have Sarah Gray, Rob Rulin. With McGuire, Gillespie and Associates, we have Erica Ruggiero. Borderless Studio, Paola Aguirre Serrano. With Goodman Williams Group, we have Linda Goodman and Kristen Hayes. Next slide. So in previous slides, we mentioned, for the couple of weeks and last couple of months, we've been trying to engage with some local organizations, internal departments, our aldermanic offices. This is a brief summary of some of the groups that we're working with. So some of you mentioned that you heard about the event through your local organizations. So moving forward, we'll be touch pointing with some advocates, local community-based organizations, and businesses along the corridor. So thank you all for participating. Can't mention all of them tonight, but we'll be hearing more from them as the next months come up. Next slide. So project overview. So the next couple of slides, we're gonna talk about just a little bit more about what we're here for and why you're all joining us today. Next slide. So this project, we're trying to evaluate and provide recommendations for a future Milwaukee Avenue Special Character Overlay District. We'll get a little bit more into detail in the next coming slides on what that actually means. But the boundary will be spanning from Western Avenue to Central Park Avenue. This will exclude Chicago landmark properties and Chicago landmark district boundaries that are within Avondale and Logan Square. Next slide. We will be giving you an overview of what is a special character overlay district, what is the value of what we're calling a SCOD, again, special character overlay district. Just talking about some historic preservation tools that will be used as supplemental tools for us and resources. And then we also will be giving overview of what the regulatory process is of a SCOD. Next slide. So, a special character overlay district. This is actually a Chicago zoning ordinance that exists as of today for anyone who wants to take a look at it. It is 17-7-066. And these districts are intended to enhance and preserve unique physical character properties within their boundaries. And these are actually identified in our city's zoning map. Things that are unique or distinct physical characteristics can come in many shapes and forms. A few of them here are having the size, shape, or lot configuration. This can consist of building types, architectural styles, environmental or physical features, and identifiable and cohesive neighborhood units, as well as adjacencies to existing landmark districts. Next slide. Some of you may be asking, what is the value of a special character overlay district? This isn't something new. This is actually an effort that's been going on for the last couple of years. It's definitely something that was lifted and advocated by local organizations as well as our aldermanic offices. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Alderman Rosa that wanted to give just a little bit of context on what the value of this is. Alderman Rosa.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Hello, everybody. My name is Carlos Ramirez Rosa. I'm the Alderman of Chicago's 35th Ward. And I'm really excited that we are moving forward with this process. Some years ago, residents organized together as Logan Square Neighborhood Association, now Palenque LSNA, and Logan Square Preservation approached my office, the office of Alderman Scott Wagasback, and the office of Alderman Daniel Espada to talk about what more could be done to ensure that there's development without displacement, to ensure that there's development that fits the character of our community. In conversations with our commissioner of the Department of Planning and Development and through some research, we found that, while the landmark district had done a lot of important things to protect buildings, not every building can be within the landmark district. And the landmark district couldn't necessarily be extended to other stretches of Milwaukee. And so we started looking for other tools that could help us achieve the goals that we were seeking to achieve in terms of protecting the Main Street feel of Milwaukee Avenue, protecting longtime residents, attracting new investment, making sure that we really, have policies in place that promote the diversity and the uniqueness of Logan Square and Avondale, because we all know as Logan Square and Avondale residents that there's so much that is unique and that there is to love about our community. So this was really an opportunity to talk about how we can move forward policies for this stretch of Milwaukee Avenue. And that's how we ended up partnering with DPD to move this process forward. So I'm really excited that we're moving this process forward. With the new ward boundaries, the 35th Ward will represent all of Milwaukee Avenue from Kedzie to Central Park, but it'll also represent the southwestern side of Milwaukee Avenue from Sacramento to Kedzie. So more of this stretch that we're looking at will be in the 35th Ward. So you have my commitment as 35th Ward Alderman to work with the residents, to work with all stakeholders, to work with our experts in DPD, to make sure that we are coming up with policies that are in the best interest of everyone, and that we're doing so collectively with community input at the heart of everything that we do. So I'm really excited that we're kicking this process off, and I'm just so excited to hear the input that you all have to share and the input that you will have over the next several meetings.
Great, thank you, Alderman. And now we're gonna have a couple of words from Alderman Laspada.
Thank you so much, Carmen. I'm as excited as Alderman Rosa is to be participating in this process with all of you, to be looking here and seeing 137 participants in this meeting speaks to how deeply you all care and how much you're invested in this community. As I was reflecting on this, it's been over the holidays since our last stakeholder meeting, and my wife always gives great gifts. She gave me a book called Building for Hope by Marwa al-Sabuni, a Syrian architect. And I want to read to you something very briefly that made me think about this process. When asking about her ideal city, her ideal neighborhood, she had said, so what is the answer? How do we rebuild our destroyed cities and regain our abandoned homes? If a ready-made solution is rejected and a patchwork one is not enough, is there any answer to this dilemma? Sounds like the question that we're wrestling with through this process. And she goes on to say, perhaps it lies in rephrasing the question to ask not how our cities should look, but rather how they should make us feel. Instead of searching for the image first in order to beget the feeling, perhaps we need to identify the feeling before the right image can be found. And that is a really truthful thing to me as someone who at points earlier in my life lived at the very other end of this impact area. Now my office is over at Western in Milwaukee. We're going to talk a lot throughout this process about image, architecture, aesthetics. But I would encourage you throughout to think about how do you want this corridor to make you feel over the time you live here, you shop here, you walk these streets. What is that feeling that we want to create through this architectural aesthetic overlay work that we're going to be participating in? Thank you so much. And again, really glad to have you all here this evening.
Thank you, Alderman. Okay, next slide. In taking a look at this effort, not only, some of the principles that we've outlined are we going to use as tools, but we currently have some existing supplemental tools that will be used in conjunction. We'll be using this to reference throughout the project. And obviously, two of these are under the city of Chicago jurisdiction, and one of them is under a national jurisdiction. So the first one that we would be using to reference would be the Chicago Historic Research Survey. And this is something that's used to collect the inventory of buildings that were constructed prior to 1940. And this analyzes the historic and architectural significance of each building. The next would be the landmarks and the landmark district designation. This is municipal legislation to preserve and protect designated historic properties. The National Register of Historic Places. This is under the national jurisdiction. This is the official list of the nation's historic places. Next slide. This is just a real brief summary. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than what we have it listed here, but just a brief overview of what a regulatory process of a special character overlay district would entail. There would be an application. There would be city review and confirmation. There would be development and design guidelines included with this. After this, there would be a confirmation, a public meeting where we would allow public speakers, anyone who would like to provide additional comments and questions and things for us to think about. City council review and approval would be needed. Then the final phase would be to have a permit review by Department of Planning Developments per the design guidelines. Next slide. The next two slides, we're going to really talk about what is this project and what this project will not be. Slide. So we just want to give a clear outline of what this project is aiming to do. We are aiming to protect the character of Milwaukee Avenue, the built environment. We want to provide guidelines and tools to rehabilitate historic buildings and commercial retail. We want to reduce conflicts between new construction and existing built environment. We also want to co-create design guidelines for the corridor with the community and with the neighborhood stakeholders. And this will provide tools and resources and a direction for renovation, redevelopment, and new construction along this corridor. And the study will help retain and encourage new affordable housing opportunities. Next slide. What this project does not include. This project is not to propose changes to the existing Chicago landmark properties, nor the landmark district boundaries. The project will not require a demolition delay of existing buildings unless a building is identified as red or orange rated, and that's identified in the Chicago Historic Resource Survey. And this project is not going to focus on ongoing or approved public or private proposals. Next slide. So some of the deliverables that we'll be working with in conjunction with our working group and our consultants. This is a very brief summary. There's a lot of work that's going to go in here, but the final report that we will have at the end of the study, we will have an overlay district designation. We'll have design guidelines. This will be the first of design guidelines that we actually have for special character overlay districts with the existing ones that we have now. So we're really excited. This is going to be the first one that have design guidelines to help development. And at the end, we're also going to focus on a few targeted focus areas along Milwaukee Avenue. And our consultant team will get a little bit into detail on the next coming slides. Next. So here's a brief summary of our timeline. So we are very early stages of this process. We're just barely in Q1. So today's community meeting, this is the first touch point. This is the first opportunity for us to introduce the project to you. There will be other opportunities. We will have additional community meetings as this process moves along. We also are working with local stakeholder groups, local organizations, local business owners, the aldermanic offices. And as we move along, we'll be working with those groups and making sure that what we're going to be proposing and sharing with the public also has another set of eyes to give us input. So there's a lot more that goes into this timeline, but we're looking at moving into Q4 of 2023. Next slide. Okay. So now I'm going to be turning this over to Erica.
Awesome. Thank you, Carmen.
You're welcome.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Erica Ruggiero with McGuire-Gillespie. Tonight, we wanted to share some of our initial findings and gather feedback. We kicked off this project with several studies, so this is just kind of the beginning process of that. Next slide, please. So first, we started with an existing condition survey, which studies the character of Milwaukee Avenue. And I'm going to introduce some of those preliminary findings before turning it over to Rob to discuss recent and ongoing developments and the study's focus areas. So now to touch on the history and character of Milwaukee Avenue that actually brings us here today. So for over 200 years, Milwaukee Avenue has served as a truly significant thoroughfare for the region and the city of Chicago. It really first started as a Native American trail before being developed into a toll road in the mid-1800s to connect northeastern Illinois. And then from there, it naturally transitioned into a commercial corridor developed by Chicago's early European immigrants and continues today as a commercial center for the city's Latinx population. This history is represented by the unique and rich variety of historic and contemporary architecture which lines the avenue. Next slide. Milwaukee Avenue as one of the core commercial centers for the city is illustrated through the vibrant and diverse use of the corridor with a mix of commercial, institutional, and educational properties, and a blend of legacy and new businesses along the avenue. Together with the built environment and the long-term use and diverse development of Milwaukee Avenue by the community, these both contribute to the corridor's sense of place and character, as well as the feeling that Alderman Laspada mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So one of the first studies that we had undertaken as part of this larger SCOD project was an existing condition survey, which documents each individual building within the study area and identifies character and non-character buildings. Character buildings predominantly date from the historic development of the community and share common architectural features, craftsmanship, decorative details, and features which contribute to the sense of place and history of Milwaukee Avenue, but are not necessarily designated Chicago landmarks or listed in the National Register of Historic Places, as Carmen shared earlier. The survey also documented character features which contribute to the development pattern of the historic and/or present character in the study area, such as the setback of a building from the public sidewalk, landscape features, building shape, the pattern of windows and door openings and storefronts, roof features, or materials that are unique to the study area. Next slide. On the screen is a current map of the identified character versus non-character buildings. To date, we've identified 120 character buildings and 108 non-character buildings. Also represented on the map are National Register listed properties, which include the Congress Theater and the Chicago Boulevard System Historic District, as well as City of Chicago landmarks, which also include the Congress Theater, in addition to the Logan Square Boulevard System and the Milwaukee Diversey-Kimball District. Next slide, please. On the screen is just a small representation of those character buildings that we've identified so far. But what this sampling does do is illustrate the character and feeling of the corridor through the use of common materials, similar shape and height, roof lines and roof features, and a clear division of ground floor commercial and upper floor residential or commercial space, as well as that rhythm of storefronts, doors, and window openings. Next slide. So I've just touched on how we've begun to identify character buildings and individual character features, but we want to take some time now to hear from you on what defines Milwaukee Avenue's character to you. So again, you can join the poll via the QR code or on the website, www.slido.com, and enter the code 1092245 when prompted. Once you're in there, please share a short answer and tell us what you think Milwaukee Avenue's character means to you. I see some initial responses, which are great. It really is about the culture and the people and the vibrancy of Milwaukee Avenue. We would absolutely agree with that. You know, we've really focused on the built environment so far, but there's so much more than that. And I think everyone here is really hinting at that in the poll. Yeah, absolutely, about small businesses and legacy businesses, density and walkability. Yeah, and diversity as well. And you know, I see the historic built environment in there. All of this really contributes to that character and feeling of Milwaukee Avenue. We'll give it a few more seconds, just in case anyone's still thinking of what they would like to write. I know it's hard to summarize your thoughts into 1 or 2 words. Great. So I thank you so much for your responses. It seems that responses are starting to slow. So I'll turn it over to Rob with site design now to introduce recent and ongoing developments in the corridor, as well as the studies focus areas.
Great, thanks, Erica, and good evening, everyone. So I just want to touch on some recent and ongoing developments and over a few slides here. And I know we've all seen it. There's been a lot of activity along North Milwaukee in this project study area. And in actuality, that's 31 projects, and there's been a flurry of projects in recent years. And so I think we had about 5 projects up until from 2007 to 2014. But then once we hit 2015, it really started to turn, and we had 16 projects that were constructed during that time frame. Currently, there are 10 projects that are ongoing. And as you look at the map, you can start to see a few different things that are highlighted here in the study area. And so the areas in the solid orange boxes are recent development sites. The pink areas are North Milwaukee development sites that are under construction. And then we have ongoing and future developments, which are this lighter orange with the dashed outline. And so you can see there's been like I said, a flurry of activity up and down the corridor, which has totaled to 1,400 residential units built since 2007 and over 100,000 square feet of retail added since 2007. So quite a robust amount of activity. Go to the next slide, please. So what does that start to look like? Here's a few photos of some of the key ongoing development sites or recent sites that we've seen pop up along the corridor. For instance, the Target building at 2480 North Milwaukee, some of the improvements at 2733 Belden. You start to see a very interesting variety of architectural styles and materials and usage, and how various urban design and design principles have been applied to these. Some may be more successful than others. And so that's something that we've been trying to come to grips with and figure out how we can incorporate into our future work. Go to the next slide, please. So Erica mentioned earlier focus areas. So we are looking at a few different focus areas as a part of this project. And so there's about 5 focus areas, and they are defined by these black outlines up and down the corridor. And so we're going to be looking at 3 to 5 focus areas. And the idea is that we want to look at urban design development scenarios within these focus areas and what would contextually fit within these spaces and within the spirit of the SCOD. And so right now, these are the current outlines. We've had some really great feedback so far from the working group and have adjusted some of those. So if is there any feedback from this group tonight, please feel free to submit comments or questions. We'd love to hear from you if you think that we have it right, or if we should adjust these boundaries a little bit. But this is what we're currently thinking in terms of focus areas that we'd like to explore further. So community engagement. We just have one slide on this, and I really wanted to hit upon this with everyone. It is absolutely thrilling to see that we have over 130 some odd attendees tonight. And it was great to see all the different avenues for which you heard about this and were able to participate tonight. But we're going to be using a variety of communication tools to get the word out. And this is fantastic that we all have your email addresses now, and so we can all keep messaging you and making sure that you can attend. But for instance, the first one, always where you're going to see the most up-to-date information and the greatest breadth of information, is going to be the project website. So after this meeting, and in the future, we're going to be posting FAQs. So we'll be answering those frequently asked questions that we're seeing here in the chat. And we'll be having the presentation as well as recordings and other materials added to the project website at Chicago.gov/MilwaukeeAve. We'll have, like I mentioned, the FAQs posted on the website. In addition, keep an eye out for flyers and posters. I'm sure some of you may have seen those around the neighborhood in the weeks leading up to this. So we'll be posting those. And then there will be social media posts as well, providing all of the relevant information for you to participate, provide feedback, and attend our meetings. Go to the next slide. So next steps, I believe, Carmen, this is you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Tonight was our first meeting. We're looking forward already to the second meeting. That is going to be held in the second quarter of 2023. We're anticipating this being an in-person event. At this meeting, we will be sharing some existing conditions assessments done by our consultants. We'll be talking a little bit more about some of the character buildings that have been identified so far. We'll be talking about the district boundaries that we shared in previous slides, and we'll be getting into detail with the focus areas that Rob just presented, as well as identifying opportunity sites that our design guidelines will be focusing on as well. Next slide. And like Rob mentioned, the most information, the most up-to-date that we're going to have, just so it's accessible to everyone, we'll be posting that on our Milwaukee Avenue project website. As the project continues, the project website will continue to get updated. We'll have our flyers, how to register for upcoming events, any information that we can share as we get more questions that will be posted on our FAQ tab. As well, you can always email us questions at dpd@cityofchicago.org. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over back to Sarah.
Thanks, Carmen, and thanks for everyone who presented this evening. It was a great breadth of introduction to this project. And now we'll have some time, about 20 minutes for some question and answers. And so to submit the questions, just a reminder, you can enter your questions in the Zoom Q&A window. And then we'll take a look through the questions and we'll try to go in order and answer them the order that they came in. If there are any redundant questions we think we've already answered, we will move on to the next question. And then for any unanswered questions that we have that we don't get to this evening, we'll be compiling a list of questions and answers and posting it on the website under the FAQs. So those will be distributed after the meeting, and then also this presentation will also be posted on the website after the meeting. So you can go back, review the material, and then reach out to DPD with any additional questions you may have. So feel free to take a couple of moments and type in any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we will get this started with some questions. So Rob and I are going to be moderating. Rob, feel free to.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask this first one. I can even answer it to myself if you'd like. I think there's one question about who was in the working group, or what does the working group consist of? And so I would just say that there's three main areas for that. So there's folks that represent the city. We have advocates of that, and then we also have community-based organizations. So we have all of the aldermanic representatives, the Department of Planning, Department of Planning, Historic Division and Zoning, Department of Housing, CMET, and Elevate Chicago all on the city end. But then we have various groups, whether that's the various Chamber of Commerce's, the Wicker Park, Bucktown Chamber of Commerce, Avondale, Greater Northwest Chicago Development Corporation, and then on down to more community-based organizations such as like the Bucktown Community Organization, the Logan Square Preservation, Milwaukee Avenue Alliance. That is earlier in the presentation deck, so there will be a full list posted online. So I'm not going to read all the names out, but it's a smattering of the groups that are involved.
Great, thanks, Rob. Here's a question, Carmen. How were the overall boundaries established for this project? Why not go to North Avenue or Division? It seems that areas south of the project are an important part of the corridor.
Sure, I can take that. I can take that question. Actually, when we were looking at the entire, Milwaukee Avenue, taking a look at some of the boundaries that we were initially just researching, taking a look at what the initial request was from all three aldermen. The initial request was from Western to Central Park, as well as, this study did require funding sources to be used. So when we were trying to look at all of Milwaukee Avenue, the engagement efforts that it does require, a project like this could easily be 2 years, just in the amount of distance and community engagement that needs to be had. So in this initial first step, we decided to focus on the initial request that was made by the alderman and keeping it within this actual TIF boundary. The other stretches to the north and south just really weren't realistic with the time frame that we had. Doesn't mean that in the future, we can't have additional, opportunities to study these areas, but right now we were focusing on the immediate boundary in the initial request.
Great, thank you. Question here about the design guidelines. Will these be just optional design guidelines or something with more teeth, like a form-based code?
This will actually be part of our zoning ordinance. We do have existing special character overlay districts already in our City of Chicago ordinance, except this will be the first that will have design guidelines, and this will be a tool that will be used for future development.
I could also answer that a little bit. Cindy Rubik, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, Carmen's exactly right. This would be once the design guidelines are, reviewed by this whole process, then they can be published, and we can also proceed with, City Council's process for creating a new overlay district. And then once that district is designated, then any work and permits that would happen within the boundaries then we would use the guidelines to determine if the proposal is in compliance. So we would be, just like any other design guideline review process. There are already overlay districts in other parts of the city. This would just be the first one that would have design guidelines associated with them. The other ones are more strictly like, the setback needs to be a minimum of this or within a certain range, or there are height restrictions, or they're really more, mathematical. We thought this was an important kind of strategy to have built in some kind of unique characteristics of the specific corridor that we're dealing with some of the character that we have here, and how to best integrate new construction, even if it's, a different scale, but how to best do that in a way that's still compatible with the character that's here.
Thanks, Cindy. I have a question I have a question. We did receive a question, and I'd like to propose this one to Erica. I think she could help answer this one. I guess, Erica, how many historic buildings have we already lost? And I guess that would probably be from when the survey was done. Is that fair, or do we know yet, or should we know?
From our survey?
I'm thinking the historic resources survey probably would be the only time we would know.
Yeah, we can look into that. I don't think we have a number. I don't have a number, at least off the top of my head. I know we've lost a few, especially with some of the new developments along the corridor. So we can definitely go through and As we develop our existing conditions survey, we will be looking at researching historic buildings as well as, you know, what's been lost along the corridor. So hopefully in the next community meeting, we'll have a more substantial answer to this question.
It's a good question though. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
We'll have the statistics.
Thanks, Erica.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, here's a question for the group. How can we be sure that this project does not restrict or slow down the development of housing or the opening of new businesses?
I can answer that too. This was something, you know, when we did the enabling legislation for this special character overlay district to update it for this tool, you know, we wanted to make sure, you know, wouldn't trigger like going to the Landmarks Commission or going to some committee or going, you know, going through an arduous process. So the review is going to happen at staff level after the, you know, after we go through this process, and if City Council, you know, approves an overlay district here, then you know the permits are reviewed at this administratively. So it really we don't expect this to slow the process down. So hopefully, you know, we've done it in a way to be very efficient as possible.
All right, a question about the guidelines. Will this limit height limits or unit limits for any developments on Milwaukee? I am for keeping the feel of the character, but want to make sure that we aren't limiting the ability to build more housing.
No, this project isn't necessarily going to limit. I mean, as part of the recommendations that we will have, there will be recommendations on, you know, zoning. There will be recommendations on land use as we're taking a look at the focus areas and where, you know, where these clusters are, where these nodes are. There'll be recommendations as part of the final report, but ultimately zoning changes would need to go through the normal process that we have now.
And I would say, you know, we haven't come to this with a predetermination of what the restrictions would be. I mean, that's the whole point of this engagement process. That's why we've built in, you know, so many touch points with the community so that we could, you know, analyze this, develop recommendations, and then present it publicly and get feedback so that we can determine as a group, you know, working on this together, you know, does a height limit make sense? If not, then how do we mitigate the heights so that maybe there's a way, you know, to create transitions and scale, for example. So, you know, we have not made that a determination at this point.
Cindy or Carmen, is there another neighborhood of the cities that's going through a similar process currently?
This is the first one that would be developing design guidelines for an overlay district. But like I said, there are multiple other overlay districts in effect in other communities, you know, Sheridan Road, Longwood Drive, but they just don't have design guidelines. So they're not able to be, you know, somewhat flexible. And they also don't have good design guidelines that address rehabilitation, which is something we really want to encourage. There was another question in the Q&A about demolition. And it was discussed early in the presentation, you know, this overlay district does not prevent demolitions. The only tool that can do that is a landmark district, a Chicago landmark district. So, and even then, you know, there are demolitions of non-contributing buildings that is allowed as long as City Council approves it. So there's mechanisms for that. But in an overlay district like the one we're talking about here, you know, we're trying to encourage best practices, and we would, explain how best to rehabilitate a building. But if someone really insisted on demolishing a character building, they could, but then the new construction would have to then comply with the new construction design guidelines that we would put in this future book that we are trying to create and develop together.
I'll ask this one again. Cindy and Carmen, sorry to keep putting you on the spot. Would these new guidelines include any sustainability measures for the buildings?
I think that makes sense. I mean, we should absolutely, it's really an important point to consider. And, we should be striving to make our communities more resilient, right? We know that climate change is real and storms are getting worse and worse all across the world. So, I think we should have a forward-looking document that really positions this neighborhood in a way that and it grows and develops in a way that's more sustainable. So I would encourage that.
And any development that would present and would have a normal review process, for like plan developments, there's already requirements that would be, they would have to adhere to our sustainability policy. So, that necessarily isn't going away, but for sure, we would include, those references within this design guideline.
Another question we did receive, has there been any traffic study completed as a part of this project, or does it not apply? There will not be a traffic study associated with this project. This is just for the architectural features and the development sites themselves. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page there. So we aren't going to be looking at bike improvements or traffic study or curbside use, things like that.
No, and part of this process, we are, in communication, in collaboration with CDOT and ongoing projects. So just because we're not addressing those things doesn't mean that we're not in communication with them. Any recommendations that will be included, of course, will have the input of those departments as well.
Thank you, Carmen. And they are here. They are represented here tonight. So
yeah, they are.
Sarah, you're muted. I think you're reading it.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Question about focus areas. Erica, maybe you could take this one. What do the distinct focus areas represent in terms of the goals of this project? Have each of these been identified as having a distinct character to be preserved?
Sure. Yeah, so each focus area has been identified based on distinct character or sense of place that obviously contributes to Milwaukee Avenue as a whole. Some also look at acting kind of as a transitional zone between landmark districts. So we know the landmark districts are excluded, but there's at least one focus area that's located between the Logan Square Boulevard district and the Milwaukee Kimball Diversity District, and looking at preserving that historic character between those two districts, as well as just also looking at focus areas that have a significant number of vacant lots or underutilized lots and parking lots, and how we can promote appropriate new development within the corridor within those focus areas. So each focus area has its own kind of reason as to why it's been identified.
Another question I'm seeing here within the chat is, has a location for the next community meeting been established, and is there a hashtag to share on social media? We are still looking for, I believe, a location for the next meeting. If it's going to be a group this big with over 120 attendees, would love some suggestions and suggestions on hashtags.
Yeah, it's part of our engagement. We have reached out to some local partners, some schools adjacent. So once we have some ideas, we'll make sure that we share those with the working group.
Okay, it looks like we have quite a few open questions still, and we're at 7 o'clock right now. So I think we should ask maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then for any unanswered questions that we didn't get to, we will write up written responses and post these to our website along with the presentation slides you saw today. So a question here. What leverage will you have with regard to new construction and even renovation of buildings along the corridor? DPD, I don't know if you'd like to speak to that.
I mean, I don't know if leverage is the right word. I mean, the design guidelines will be published. It'll be part of a zoning overlay. So it's kind of like the way you have to, when you submit a permit and you have to check all your, you know, do you comply with the setback? Do you comply with, you know, the FAR? Do you comply with, you know, you know, there's all sorts of rules and regulations, right? With the zoning code for any part of the city. Here, it would be just an overlay with the design guidelines. So we would be checking if the work that's being proposed, the new construction, the addition, the alterations are consistent with the guidelines. And then if it's not, there is an appeals process, just like there is through, you know, just through the regular code. There are certain elements that can be appealed through either administrative adjustment or through the Zoning Board of Appeals. And so we haven't determined what those thresholds would be. And that would be another kind of element that we would have to decide upon through this process.
Great, thanks, Cindy. Okay, one more question we'll pose. Will the guidelines be limited to properties on Milwaukee Avenue, or could they also apply to adjacent stretches of intersecting avenues, California, Western, etc.?
I think this is something that we talked about early on and internally, you know, and even with some input from a working group in our aldermanic offices. Some of the principles that we will be addressing obviously will be part of Milwaukee Avenue, but, you know, as our boundary is taking a look at some important intersections, some overlaps, you know, we have identified areas of importance that although they may not be in Milwaukee Avenue, they will be important to the scale, the view, and adjacencies. So we have taken a look at that, and we'll be including things like that in our final report.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Carmen. I will hand it back to you to wrap it up.
Well, that's an easy slide. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We really appreciate all of you taking this time in your evenings. You know, it was a great turnout, well over 130 something folks and attending. This meeting will be posted to our project website. Our materials will also be posted to the project website. And we will try to wrap up these questions and have this posted as well. So for anyone who knows of someone or an organization that wasn't able to attend, please welcome them to come to the website, take a look at the materials, listen to the recordings, and the future meeting will also be posted for you to register. So again, thank you all so much, and we look forward to our next meeting.